What's up, guys? I'm Nobody Special. And according to the Wall Street Journal today, the central government in China has told local governments to prepare for a possible storm surrounding the Evergrande collapse. Now, this flies in the face of some of the repeated messaging calling for calm and reassurance that everything was under control at Evergrande. So what's going on? Well, when you dig into the details, you start to see that there is a massive problem hiding just beneath the surface in China's real estate market, and Evergrande is just the tip of the iceberg. You ready? Hit it. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jack Gamble, and I'm Nobody Special. And you may have noticed there's a little change to the intro music today. We're working through some copyright issues, so I hope you like the new song. Now, the big story, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the central government in China is telling local governments to prepare for a possible storm. And I want to get into a little bit about what that possible storm might look like and what's causing it. And there are some very systemic issues that go way, way beyond Evergrande in China, and that this problem is going to get much, much bigger. Maybe not right away, but in a matter of months, not years. And before we do that, guys, I have to ask you, please remember to smash that big, beautiful, transitory like button. Subscribe to my channel. Don't forget that notification bell. It helps me to keep this channel growing, and I would be forever in your debt. Now, with that, let's shrink my head, and let's look a little bit into what is going on in China. First, I want to show, this is the article in CNBC. Now, this is based on the Wall Street Journal headline. All right, China asks local officials to prepare for possible storm if Evergrande fails, the Wall Street Journal says. And I want to point out here that local officials described the signals from Chinese authorities as getting ready for the possible storm and said that the government told them they should only step in at the last minute to prevent spillover effects from Evergrande's demise. All right, so it's not, the government is not saying we're not doing anything here. They're saying wait until the last possible minute. Well, that's going to be a tough call. When are you going to know it's the last possible minute? Just want to point that out. Now, there's this other article here, and this is in Street Insider. It goes into a little more detail about this story from the Wall Street Journal, and I want to read one excerpt here. According to the Wall Street Journal, local authorities have been told to step in only at the last minute should Evergrande come extremely close to defaulting. One of the topics discussed is how to limit job losses and potential social unrest. Now, I want to elaborate on that a little bit because one of the biggest fears in oppressive, draconian governments is social unrest. All right, that's a big deal. Factor it this way, or think about it this way. Powerful people want one thing: to stay in power, right? That's why here in the United States, politicians only care about one thing: getting reelected, right? If here in the U.S., if we're not happy with government, we say vote the bums out, and they get replaced, usually with another bum, but that's another story. But in China, there is no vote the bums out, all right? In China, the people doing the social unrest have no recourse. They have no way to replace the people that are doing a bad job. And generally, that doesn't end well, right? And when you get widespread social unrest and demonstration in China, it usually doesn't end well for the demonstrator. And China can't afford that, okay? China is in this power grab, and they're trying to become the world's lone superpower. They're trying to, supplant the United States as the dominant power in the world. Well, they can't do that if there's pictures and headlines of them machine gunning protesters. And that's typically been how China has reacted to protests, hasn't it? That was ominous. We just had a huge crack of thunder right as I said that. Okay, I get it. So if you're wondering why would the government be so afraid of social unrest or why would they expect a storm to be coming? You have to dig into the details of how Chinese local governments get their funding. And this kind of explains just how deep beneath the surface this iceberg really is. Again, Evergrande is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more going on here. So with that, I'm going to shrink me again. And I want to point you to this. Now, this is CKGSB. I'm not really sure the name of this outfit, but I've read something similar before. The role of land sales and local government financing in China. Now, first you have to understand that all land in China is owned by the government. Okay, I've had some people point this out to me on this channel before. Nobody really owns land in China. It's all owned by the government. That's true, right? China issues leases for land from the government for use for anywhere from 50 to 70 to 100 years, depending on the use. Industrial land is different than residential land, but basically all land is owned by the government. Now, before you scoff at that, I want you to factor in, here in the States, we may own our land, but we owe property taxes of about 1 or 2% a year, right? And what happens if we don't pay those property taxes? The government takes our land. All right, so before you scoff at China's land ownership policy, let's be fair here. Even here in the States, it's the same thing, right? 50 years of property taxes at 1 or 2% of the property's value. Well, guess what? That's basically the whole price of the land, right? So that's really, we only rent our land from the government here in the U.S. anyway, even though we talk about property rights. But that's a subject for another day. So China's local governments, you need to understand that they get most of their funding from land sales. And I want to point out to some of the things in this article here. Now, this is from 2014. This is an old article, but this story hasn't really changed much. Last month, China launched a national audit of the land transferring fees collected by local governments in the past 6 years, which totaled 15 trillion renminbi, which is basically the yuan. They have two different names for their currency, or about $2.4 trillion. Now, that's over 6 years. And this is from 2014. So this number has probably ballooned big time since then. The fees, or in other words, the income from land sales, accounts for as much as 35% of local government's fiscal revenue in 2013, according to China Business News, a Chinese language finance newspaper. Now, that's a very big deal. 35% of local government revenue, all right? Because in China, let me expand here. In China, the social services, right, the social safety net, pensions, and government retirement funds, it's all paid for by the provincial governments. So the provincial governments have the lion's share of the funding needs, even though most of the taxes go to the central government. So they've had to get a little creative with their accounting over the years. Besides these land lease fees, one of the things that Chinese local governments have done is what's called a LGFV, Local Government Financing Vehicle. And what they've done is they've taken some of the land in their provinces and they've put them into shell companies. And then those shell companies have borrowed against the land from Chinese banks in order to fund the local governments. Now, this is the secret debt that a lot of people worry about in China. Now, this secret debt, or this off-balance sheet activity, there's that phrase again, off-balance sheet. You're going to hear a lot about that in the coming months. I want to shrink me and point you to another article here. All right, China tightens grip on local government hidden debt. Now, in this article, I want to point to something here. China is stepping up restrictions on financing to local government facilities, or LGFVs, to mitigate risks from hidden debt. And I want to scroll down to the bottom of this article because this line right here is powerful. Nomura estimated in a note in April that local government hidden debts reached 45 trillion yuan at the end of 2020. 45 trillion yuan, that is almost $7 trillion. Okay? Now, the official local debt number that comes out of China is about $4 trillion US. And then this unofficial off-balance sheet hidden debt through these LGFVs is about another $7 trillion. That's $11 trillion of local government debt that has been taken out against property, against land. And to put that in perspective, the sum of all mortgages in the United States, all mortgages combined, at the end of 2020 was about $10 trillion. All right, so China's local governments alone have borrowed almost all mortgage value in the United States combined. And it's all based on land that right now is rapidly losing its value. So now you can see how this goes way beyond Evergrande. Okay, Evergrande and its $300 billion in debt by itself is not a crisis in the making. But when you factor in almost $11 trillion in local government funding, $11 trillion in local government debt that has been used to fund this growth over the years. And there are payments due on that debt, and there's interest on that debt. And how do these local governments get their money to pay for that debt? By taking out more debt. Well, now the government has put limits on that. So the local governments don't have access to their funding that they need to service this mountain, this $11 trillion of debt. Oh, and on top of that, China has an aging population. And remember, the provincial governments pay for most of these retirement services, most of these social services. Well, they're losing their biggest source of revenue right now, land leases and new debt taken out against property. They can't do that anymore. So how are they going to simultaneously fund the interest and the payments due on their debt while at the same time funding the ballooning cost of an aging population while their main source of revenue, land leases, is drying up? And this is why the Chinese central government is telling provincial governments, you need to prepare for a storm. Because as land and real estate loses its value, people are losing their savings, people are losing their retirement. At the same time, the governments are becoming less and less able to provide for those people through their social safety net programs. So this is why there is a ticking time bomb going off in the Chinese real estate market. Now, if you think China's local governments are not worried about this problem, look here at this article. This is from September 1st in Reuters. China new home price growth slowest in 5 months, private survey finds. Now, this article is a few weeks old. Not only is China home price growth slowed since September 1st, I bet you it is deeply, deeply negative just in the last couple of weeks. But there's a point in this article I want to point out to you. All the way down here at the bottom. Land sales to developers by floor space declined 32% in August from a month earlier and fell 42% on an annual basis, according to separate data from the group. So I want you to think about that number. Land sales to developers by floor space are down 32% month over month, 42% annually. Remember, how does China's local governments get their funding? By the selling of land leases to developers. And that is down 32% in a month, and that was September 1st. I bet you it's way, way down since September 1st. 42% year over year. So right now, the funding source for these local governments is evaporating. Their debt problem is bigger than ever. Lending is drying up. Banks are tightening their lending to each other. We talked about that yesterday. And now these local governments that have this huge mountain of debt are losing their only source of revenue at a time as their population ages and demand on their social safety net programs is at an all-time high. China has a ticking time bomb of debt going on right now in their country. And this problem gets even worse. Again, I'm going to shrink me down here because I also want to point you to this number. And if you think we're starting to sound like the Lehman Brothers, all right. Now, this article is from May 12th of 2020. This is a year-old data, okay? Hold on, I'm a little too big here. This is year-old data. COVID-19 and China's household debt dilemma. I want to read you a little bit of the excerpts from this. China's households have been among the world's best savers until recently. In only 5 years, household debt has surged to 128% of household income, or 56% of Chinese GDP. Now, I want to give you a few numbers here. China's recent household debt expansion rivals that of the United States pre-crisis, referring to the GFC, within a smaller economy. Now, keep this in mind. China is a very growing country, but it is a much smaller economy than the U.S. still. Over the past 5 years, from 2015 to 2019, China's households have added $4.6 trillion in borrowing, compared to $5.1 trillion expansion in U.S. household debt from Q3 of 2003 to Q3 of 2008. So China's household debt, all right, the amount of mortgages, and I've seen some people on this channel say it's not that big a deal. China doesn't have mortgages like the U.S. had mortgages. That's not true. In the last 5 years, China's household debt has grown by $4.6 trillion. That is almost as much debt as the U.S. households added in the 5 years leading up to the global financial crisis. Chinese local governments are up to their eyeballs in debt. the official numbers. China has these secret LGFV hidden debts off balance sheet of $7 trillion. Chinese households have added $4.6 trillion of debt, mostly mortgage debt. Now you're starting to see how the trillions are piled up. And folks, this is where a banking crisis comes from. This is so much bigger than Evergrande and their $300 billion. I mean, we're talking about a few $1,000,000 of an interest payment here, and we're talking about how, no, it's not that big of a problem. BlackRock can absorb that loss, no problem. Folks, Evergrande is just the poster boy for this thing. Evergrande is a drop in the bucket compared to the systemic risk of China's debt surrounding land use and real estate. And nobody is borrowing to buy real estate right now. Nobody wants to be buying. No one wants to be stuck holding that bag. The value of Chinese real estate is tanking right now. It's in free fall. And all of these banks and governments and households have all of their wealth and all of their finances tied up in real estate. This absolutely is a systemic risk to the entire Chinese economy. And lastly, I want to point out to this article right here. This is from last night. China's central bank injects liquidity into the market. Last night, China's central bank, or the People's Bank of China, injected $18.5 billion into the overnight reverse repos. Now, I guess in China, reverse repos are kind of the same thing as a repo here in the U.S. All right, it's a loan to banks in exchange for collateral. And China's central bank is loaning cash to China's banks in exchange for collateral. And we talked about yesterday how George Gammon had figured out over at Rebel Capitalist, great channel, go follow him. But he had figured out that the majority or a major portion of the collateral in China's repo market is mortgage-backed securities, debt associated with land. All right, so China's central bank is injecting money into the system every day in exchange for this land-based collateral. China's central bank is already trying to keep its banking system afloat. So long story short, this real estate issue in China is so much bigger than Evergrande. All right, when you hear the press, especially here in the U.S., they're trying so much to sweep it under the rug because they're all making money in China and they want to keep the gravy train rolling. They don't want this crisis to blow up. But China's problems around its debt and its real estate market is so much bigger. It's every bit as big as the problem in the United States was in 2007, 2008. Every bit as big. And in a lot of ways, it's worse because as a percentage of household wealth and as a percentage of GDP in that country, real estate makes up way bigger slice of the pie than it did here in the U.S. in 2008. So watch for that stress in China's banks. Watch for the restrictions on lending. Watch for them to tighten up and start playing defense. This story is not going away. Folks, that's all I got for you today. I want to thank you for your time and thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to my channel, hit that notification bell. It would really help me out. Until next time, live small and dream big.